Shall I begin, Sangamita?
Yes, please.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this term Yoniso Manasikara, wise attention or mature attention, is one translation I've heard recently, being derived from that word yoni for womb, in the sense that it goes to the core of things and also brings into being the world that we live in through where we direct our gaze. And that world we live in turn gives birth to us and the quality of our own hearts. This dynamic of the warmth of a gaze changing the object of that gaze is, I think, most powerfully exemplified in what happens when someone who is truly exceptional in this way and has cultivated love to a level most of us can only aspire to, looks on the world and those in it, and when sees what that does to the people around them. So there's a book called Pilgrim. For those of you who haven't read it, it's well worth it. If you Google PDF Pilgrim, you'll find it. And it's the account of one of the people I consider one of the great American saints, although many don't know her. I know one monk who ordained largely because of this book, but she walked. She was a woman who began in her 50s, I think, to traverse the United States end to end, coast to coast, wearing only a sweater inscribed with the words Peace Pilgrim on the front and the back. And all she carried with her was a toothbrush and her letters that she was writing to people and receiving. And her goal was to walk for the sake of peace and to spread that message. And she carried nothing else. She fasted until she was offered food, sometimes going for 2 or 3 days. At one point, I think she fasted for 40 days, although she wasn't on the road at that time. And sleeping on the side of the road until she was offered a place to rest. So, I think she said the longest stint of sleeping on the pavement she had was 3 nights running. And her faith in, for her, what she named God, carried her through this all. And in a Buddhist vocabulary, we would say that she had very good samadhi. She was very good at walking meditation. And she speaks about this bright state that she was able to enter after years of walking by keeping God constantly in her mind. She traversed the US end to end, maybe, 4, 5, 6 times. I can't remember. Many thousands of miles over the course of 2 decades. And it's worth reading her account. But one thing that really struck me about this is the power of her heart, where she would see the absolute best in people, and it changed them immediately, undeniably. There's a story she tells of a man pulling up in a car in front of her on a long stretch in the Southwest and inviting her in. And she said, no, I think I'm just walking. And he said, no, come on, get in. It's all right. So she got in, and she just lay her head on his shoulder and slept. And she woke up a few hours later, and he was just staring in silence at the windshield. And in this stunned voice, he said, look, I meant you no good when you got in here, but I looked at you and how you, this sort of trust you had for me, and I couldn't touch you. And she left, and he, continued sitting there, sort of staring at the windshield. And she says she thinks that, probably there was some large change that happened at that moment. And there's other stories she tells of walking into a bar and, sort of an unsavory group meeting her, or, waiting for her there. And just how she saw the humanity in all of them and treated them as their best selves, and how people came up to her after and said repeatedly, you saw in me something that I didn't know still existed. And there's more accounts of her, getting put in a jail cell for trespassing or just for walking. And by the time she leaves, everyone else in the jail cell has, been singing hymns and joking with each other for the last 12 hours, because she convinces them that what else are they going to do but pray? So, not to make light of the dangers a woman would encounter walking along the side of the road alone, and not to say that one should take those things lightly, but there's something to be seen in what a gaze of goodwill can do to someone. People close to me recently had some friends get in a difficult argument, more than an argument, enormous disagreement with one another. And we're really pushing these people to take sides. And it was a testament to their practice and equanimity that instead of siding with one or the other, and there were reasons to side against and for both, was an acknowledgement that our role as practitioners is not to punish or judge, but to love people as much as we can and provide that gaze for everyone. And it doesn't mean we have to be naive or a pushover. Doesn't mean we don't set boundaries and draw back from those who aren't wholesome to us. But even as we do that, we can, using all the tools we just went through, look at people as flawed but utterly worthy of love, and see the transcendent in them. Because the more we see it in ourselves, the more we can see it in others. Just to finish this point, there's a wonderful video, a documentary on YouTube called Human. And it's a documentary, you can search Human documentary. And it's these interviews with people. And it begins with one of a man speaking about, he committed a horrible crime and a double murder. And the mother of the murdered person took him in after prison and basically raised him. And it's just his testament to what her ability to look at him in that way, in line with his deepest humanity, meant in the end, and how it saved him. So this, people can look at our practice as this self-involved thing if they don't understand it, if they haven't experienced it. But when you realize that what we're cultivating is the ability to direct our gaze and see past our own projections and stop looking to others to nourish and support us, but rather look to others in a way that lets us bless them as much as we're able with our own goodwill. And that takes a solidity of heart cultivated in meditation and a skill and agility in practice and an inner wealth that we gain through this path that lets us just enter the world in a way where we wish to give. It's not a selfish act, and it's what people need more than anything, is to be truly seen and heard. So, to finish up on the practical stepping stones towards that gaze of goodwill, the next of the list of uses of appropriate attention that we haven't covered yet is analyzing things in terms of the drawback, the benefit or advantage, and the escape. This is called the Gratification Triad in Buddhism. The Pali is the asada, is the benefit, the adinava is the drawback, and the nisarna is the escape. So this is a really powerful analytical tool where you take a negative state in the mind, and it's easy to look at the negative states in terms of what they do to us. We know the drawback, at least some of it. And yet we can't let go. And some of that seems to be because we haven't comprehended the full picture yet, because we haven't looked carefully at what attracts us. What's the attraction? What are we getting from it? And in line with what we talked about in terms of seeing things in terms of causes and conditions, and that when you understand what brings something into being, it's much more easy to be at peace with it and to let it go. Even so, when we see the draw, the seduction of a negative state, why we keep bringing it up, it becomes much more easy to be at peace with and then to let go. So, we understand the downsides of anger well enough. But do we understand, and can we look carefully at what draws us to it? What do we get from it? A sense of perhaps orientation in the world, a sense of self-righteousness. There's almost nothing more seductive than that mind state. And of orientation, of grounding, of knowing who we are and who they are. And even if there's a sort of burning flavor to that whole experience, there's something very powerful about it too, and very attractive. So this is the benefit of meditation, is you get to see these mind states arise in a safe environment, and you can really taste them carefully. And, some people ask, okay, if there's no self in Buddhism, what does karma happen to? And this is looking at karma in the context of self. A self moves along and karma happens to it. But in Buddhism, that's all backwards. It's rather that the self happens in the context of karma. So we have these habit patterns of these that carry over, this continuity. And one of those habit patterns is our creation of self. And you can see this by the fact that creation of self, we create different flavors of self, and we get something out of creating it. And you see this very clearly in this draw, this seduction of anger, is that sense of self that arises with it, that we create with that sensation of self-righteousness or anger, is very powerful and has a distinct flavor. And similarly, just seeing, carefully tracking the conditions, you begin to connect more dots as you meditate and keep mindfulness, where you see more and more, for example, what breaking your sila does to your meditation in the evening, what transgressing the precepts or what you know you should do. You tell a lie, you speak in anger, and what's your meditation like? You see the disadvantage more clearly, the downside more and more clearly of these things. Or you begin to connect the dots more with, you know, say drinking the night before and then the grumpy mood you wake up in. You know, these things become more and more apparent. And that's useful because when we do clearly see the drawback and the advantage of any mind state and see that the disadvantage outweighs the advantage, then we can let go. And that's the escape, the nisarana. And this disenchantment with things that deserve to be disenchanted with. Ajahn Jeff frequently references a New Yorker cartoon where there's this cow and it looks up from this grass and it says, wait, this is grass. We're eating grass. And I think that's quite good. But as we become disenchanted with these things, with these negative mind states, with these old habits, it's important to also emphasize that escape, because that's what we become enchanted with. We become enchanted with this path, with the good friendships we cultivate in this Sangha, with what it means to have real purpose. And that lets us let go. That's understanding the escape. So there's something to be said. Yes, we have to look at the advantage and the disadvantage carefully, and that's wisdom. But to also raise up the escape, the nisarana, is really important, and to make much of it. Ajahn Pasno says that wisdom will take you to the edge, but only faith lets you jump. So frequently the escape is surrender to something we don't know yet, because you're stepping into something that you have not stepped into, and it is frightening. And sometimes that's as simple as using adhitthana, which is a Pali word for determination. And it's a useful tool for some of us. If you just know you should let go of something and you just can't, just taking that leap of faith and courage to say, I'm done. Like, I will not do this anymore. I will not smoke. I will not, whatever, have a glass of wine, or go out drinking, or engage in gossip like I do, or lie, and just making a very clear determination. And if you need help with that, I know one skillful means is you give a friend of yours who you trust a check written to the political party you don't like, and you tell them that if you break this precept, you will call them and they have to mail that check. And that's very helpful. And also just raising up, those moments of seeing the escape and embodying it and stepping into monasteries and retreats, into spiritual friendships. In meditation, this is relevant because you do encounter refined states of mind where it's very disorienting, when the breath begins to be more subtle, when the previous landscape of mental constructs you've had kind of fades. This happens frequently at sort of the end of the second tetrad of Anapanasati, where the body's become calm and the mental impressions have become calm too. So no longer, it's too coarse to hold in mind a meditation word anymore. And even the residual image of the body, say, that you had subconsciously held in mind, that you thought of, that's disappeared too. And it can feel frightening. So that's when you basically need to have a bit of faith and really move to a more refined level of meditation. And a lot of times what's helpful then is to keep a very careful track on one point in the meditation of, say, the breath at the nose, or but to make sure it's very continuous, because that's what will hold you through that disorientation. And then to brighten the mind more and more so that it doesn't feel empty. Because when the mind's in that calm state, if you drop in a small perception, say of metta, it will brighten the mind to a degree that you're not used to, because it's malleable and agile. And then the mind will be able to concentrate once it's been brightened. So that's seeing, the drawback, the coarseness of one lower meditative state, and then taking the leap to the nisarna, the escape, into another level, and just acknowledging that it takes some getting used to move in our lives and our meditations. The next use of appropriate attention is arousing wholesome dhammas. And this is a broad one. Basically, there's a sutta called the Ahara Sutta, food, in the Samyutta Nikaya. I think 46.51. And it goes into how you feed and starve the hindrances and the factors of awakening in the mind using appropriate attention. And it gives a very long list of exactly, you say brighten the mind by giving attention to things that bring up energy. You calm the mind by giving attention to things that bring up calm. And it goes into detail. But this is, the different enlightenment factors are divided in half. Half of them are active, energy, rapture, investigation. Half of them are calming, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. And mindfulness is the fulcrum. It's always useful. So depending on what your state of mind is, you need to apply calming or invigorating factors of mindfulness, depending. And that's just useful to learn to cultivate, because what's wholesome in a certain moment will be different. Maybe you're tired, so you have to emphasize the inhale in your breath and bring up very active meditations of love or the preciousness of human rebirth. Or maybe you're agitated and you need to bring your awareness to your feet, emphasize the exhale, think of calm. And someone asked a question in the chat before I began, where they asked, can one become too, this isn't the word they use, but it's what's coming to mind, lackadaisical about one's meditation practice? They said, look, I've been meditating for a long time, and now when I sit, I find the mind kind of wanders a bit, but it's fine. And I still enjoy meditation. I see benefit in my daily life, but I recognize that I'm not putting the same energy into it I used to. And that's a very, very good question, because it happens. We practice for years and decades, and we fall into ruts. And even if the practice is still nourishing on some level, we're not always deeply engaged with it. So I think this is relevant in terms of arousing wholesome dhammas, because first, it's just good to acknowledge that that is part of the landscape sometimes. It's okay to, sometimes we are treading water with our practice, and not in a bad sense. We're sort of swimming there and our energy's elsewhere. And sometimes that's what practice can be. Like sometimes our life is falling apart, and it's just nice to have something that we don't have to push ourselves in, and the commentaries say that one way to cultivate the enlightenment factor of tranquility of body and mind, passaddhi, is to eat good food and to have a comfortable place to sit. So there's a place for that. But to also recognize that, yes, it's important to stay engaged, but it doesn't always happen during our daily lives. So I'd say that when one falls into a rut like that, the way to bring up wholesome dhammas again, to reflect in a way that does that, is I find it's really useful to read some new Dhamma teachers. I fell in a rut for a long time and then encountered Ajahn Nisro's translations of Tanpur Lee and those new breath techniques. Then I got in a bit of a rut with that, less of one, but I found that reading Shayla Catherine's book, Wisdom Wide and Deep, was very helpful, because she comes from the Burmese tradition more, and there's a whole different language around nimittas, patigaha nimittas, different levels of samadhi, and it's very useful to hear these different perspectives. Then I spent some time reading Ajahn Brahm's book. So mixing it up, because sometimes you do need to get interested again in your meditation and you need a new model. So if you find things are becoming dry and rote, mix it up, read a new book, listen to a new teacher, and it's okay to go somewhat far afield for that because you want a new perspective. So maybe you don't have to dive into a whole different tradition, but there's a pretty wide variety of perspectives, even within our little Theravada world. So look into them. Go, surfing a bit. And the other way is to make sure you're getting retreat every year. This is really important. The Buddha demanded or encouraged his monastics to take 3 months of every year to stay in one spot and focus on their practice. And, for the rest of the year, sometimes it's a bit like you have your meditation practice and it's like you're kind of mixing different conditions and techniques on a table in a laboratory. But people keep coming and like kicking the table and, the tubes are spilling and the hot plate's turned over, so to have a period every year, and it's not going to be 3 months for most, and it doesn't have to be once a year, it can just be regular retreats as much as you can get them, but where you really step out and just dive into meditation, like make sure that no one's kicking the table for a while, go somewhere new, some other place. And that's when you'll have the chance to really dive in and get interested again, and make sure you're journaling about your meditation and listening to talks. But that's how you get re-engaged. That's very important. I think that's the most underutilized thing with practitioners, is, there's monasteries that will take you in for free and let you stay as long as you want. If they learn you're not too crazy, which most people probably aren't. And so if you email Abhayagiri, Birkin, other places and ask to stay for a time outside of their winter retreat, then you can. The next means of using appropriate attention, and we're almost to the end, is using appropriate attention to stay in the present moment. And arousing wholesome dhammas, the previous use of appropriate attention, is in a sense a very active, or can be, method of appropriate attention. And it aligns somewhat with the fourth foundation of mindfulness. So for those who, just as a reminder, you have the four foundations where one looks at experience in terms of the body, in the body. That's the first. Feelings, in feelings. Mind as mind. And the fourth is dhammas as dhammas, which basically means dhamma categories, where the other foundations, to an extent, you're remaining with that realm of experience in and of itself. You are bringing relevant recollections to it, but to a large extent, you're just touching that experience very carefully, directly. The fourth foundation of dhammas is looking at experience in terms of the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening, the bright and dark qualities of the mind. So you take that bare experience, not that experience is ever totally bare in Buddhist thought, and you overlay the Dhamma onto it, such that you can parse out what's wholesome and unwholesome, what you need to cultivate and what you need to abandon. So that's what we had been discussing in terms of arousing wholesome dhammas, and also in terms of abandoning unwholesome by looking at the drawback and the escape. But when one talks about staying in the present moment, it aligns a bit more with the first 3 foundations, where you're really just seeing and tracking your experience right there. And that's very useful because, a lot of what we've been talking about can make meditation seem very complicated. And it's good to have tools in your tool belt, and it's fun to kind of speak about these things. But at the heart, practice can be very simple, and allowing that. So, just being with the body and tracking the breath normally, not worrying about the breath energy or visualizations or anything. But if you're able just to be with that calm, collected sense of embodied awareness, then just be with that calm, collected sense of embodied awareness in the present moment. And there's a lot there. To be really present with that experience. Track the breath through its entirety. Be there especially for the gap between the breaths, like we were saying, between the exhale and inhale and exhale. Keep it continuous through that. And the other relevant point is, I was speaking with Aya Ananda Bodhi, or listening to one of her talks. I asked her this question, and she said for her, for many years, the practice of mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, was chiefly the practice of chittanusati, which means mindfulness of mind. Which is to say that, and she expounded on this, saying that a lot of it was just seeing what hindrances were coming up to draw her away from the breath. And that's really helpful, because you will go through phases where the mind is just being drawn off into planning, into trying to decide something, into doubt, into that same fantasy you've been down again, into that same old argument, anything. And if your tunnel vision is just trying to direct you back to what you think your meditation object is, which is the breath or a mantra, it's limited and limiting. So can you be with the present moment and acknowledge that in that moment, actually what is most prominent is that defilement, and naming it, what's drawing you away. And that can do wonders. So just naming skeptical doubt, every time it draws you, doubt, that's mindfulness of mind. That's staying in the present moment. It's also mindfulness of dhammas, but it's not like if you're involved in your meditation and your meditative object and a moment of doubt comes up, you want to immediately drop that meditation object and run off labeling or investigating this hindrance. But if it keeps coming up, if it's strong, being able to name it and tame it through naming it. Um, and acknowledge that a huge portion of our meditative practice in the beginning is not calm. It's seeing what draws us away from calm. And that can, in its essence, be far more useful than having a state of peace for 30 minutes. Because those same, as we spoke of, these small patterns play out in our whole lives. So likely whatever is dominating your mind and your meditation is dominating your life and the lives of those around you in a much more damaging way. So there's a lot to be gained from knowing it and seeing it clearly. And that's staying in the present moment. And it's a huge relief to know that when our meditation's messed up and neurotic, we're right on target, because what we should look at is our messed up neuroticism. That's useful because we kind of all are a little bit neurotic, except for the arahants. Ajahn Amro's fond of saying that everyone is in the insane asylum except for the arahants. They're the only normal ones. And the final use is vibhajyavada, which means analytical conversation. It's also an epithet for the whole of the Buddhist teachings. And it's basically talk in line with any of the things we've just spoken of. And it's a great skill and quite a fun game to challenge oneself. Well, first to recognize the gift of Dharma conversation. It's wonderful. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. There's a sutta where Venerable Anuruddha and two other arahants are living together, and they still gather every 5 days and just talk Dhamma all night. And you wonder, like, what are they talking about? They're enlightened. Like, what do they have to parse out? But they do, because there's such joy in talking about truth. And there's so many ways of looking at it. It's one of the greatest blessings of this path. Wisdom of that depth resonates and emboldens. But and so it's also okay to acknowledge that we do start to spend more and more time with those who we can talk about that stuff with. But we don't always interact with only those circles. And can we approach other conversations and other people looking for how we can touch the Dhamma in them? What's the route to their hearts and their Dhamma? Because there usually is. And it might be their child or their curiosity or their passion for this or that. And usually it takes the form of us asking them questions and listening. But that thread of Dhamma is always there. So that's useful, especially coming out of Christmas and extended family and political conversations. I think this point of analytical and useful conversation has been set in stark relief when any departure from it tends to quite possibly land us in a 2-hour conversation about the current state of the political establishment or something. It becomes very clear when you've wandered, which is a gift. So it's a gift to be part of this community in this conversation. And I would hope before we end this retreat, usually I find it's quite useful and helpful to have people speak on their own experiences a bit. And we can approach that now.
Handamayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Karam Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami.
Thank you, Sangamita. So, Sangamita, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a bit of time for speaking before, say, 8:55 Mountain Time, when you'll uh, lead us out. Is that something correct-ish?
That's correct.
Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to open things up for any questions that came up, but also it would be nice to save some time. I find at these retreats, it's really nice just to hear from people. And so if you raise your electronic hand, feel free to ask a question about the talk, about Clear Mountains project and aspiration as a whole, or honestly, it would just be lovely to hear people's experience or any thoughts that have been coming up around this subject, around the Dhamma in general, or around this community. And that might help me meet some of you who I'm only just seeing for the first time now. So feel free to just chime in, and as you will. Wendy? Wendy? Oh, sorry. You're trying to unmute. Gotcha.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for taking my question. I guess I was thinking for a good part of it that you were that it was quite above me, quite beyond me, and that it was directed towards much more advanced students than I am. But anyway, towards at the end, this last part where you've been talking about the practice and how it can be simple, I found it very helpful and good ideas for me, because I have been practicing for quite a while, but it has become very dry and frustrating and so on. So this last talk has been very helpful for me, and I thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, that's really good feedback too. In terms of, yeah, I think what I'm talking about can get overly complicated, and it's good for me to keep an eye on that as well. So I certainly don't want people to be intimidated. Like, sometimes a lot of these things can be helpful, but it can be too much. And to be honest, like, right now, my practice is quite simple. I pretty much just have the sound of silence in my breath, and cold showers. but that's really it, and that's enough. So yeah, thank you for that feedback. And I really apologize if people sort of felt that it was over their heads. I know that's not what you meant, Wendy,
No.
but it's useful because practice really can be simple, and it should be. So
yes, well, that's how it seems. It should be simple and joyful.
yeah, and it's fun to have some, sometimes I found it is helpful to have these tools and other routes one can go on that are active, but it shouldn't, not everyone aligns with those at all. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Damika?
Thank you for answering the question earlier too. Since you mentioned about the sound of silence, can you just give a little explanation, description about how to do it?
Yeah. So this is a really simple and really good meditation object. It's very powerful. When Ajahn Sumedho went to England, he was sort of suddenly stunned by this quiet in the environment. And sort of picked up this, because in Thailand it's never quiet, and picked up the subtle ringing, hissing ringing right below the soundscape constantly, and began to use it as a meditation object. And if you cultivate it, it can really become ever present and very loud, and it's a very stabilizing object. So to find it, I'd say that, you can just sort of, there has to be a degree of receptivity at first to sort of listen for it. But when you're calm, just sort of listening for that subtle hissing below the soundscape, it's always there. But it can also help to put in earplugs or to submerge your head in a bathtub, like lie down in the bathtub and close your eyes and see if you can pick it out. It can become more apparent if you've plugged up your ears. So that can be a useful, skillful means to learn to grab it. And then there's a book called Inner Listening that you can find. It's a small booklet by Ajahn Amaro, which goes into a bit more of the practice. So.
Bhante, can you hear that from one ear? Like I have tried once. It just seemed, I don't know, it's, is that normal or?
Do you only have it in one ear?
Yeah, for some reason, maybe I'm not getting the.
No, I'm unsure too, because some people say, some people have tinnitus, and I'm still not sure if it's the same thing or different. My sense is that the sound of silence may not, I don't know either. That's a really good question. I'd be curious if people have feedback on that. Yeah. Donna? Yeah.
So talking about the sound of silence, it's something I've been struggling with most of my life. I've never known silence without that constant buzzing in my ears. Sometimes it's very light, sometimes it's very, very, very loud. And the thought of meditating on something that has been very annoying is quite a concept. I'm not sure whether I should explore that or not.
I don't know either. I mean, we'll have the other people speak on this, but I mean, there's always the idea you could try to shift your perception of it. I mean, I know Ajahn Sumedho speaks of it like a lover. It's something he wakes up to and goes to bed with. And if you look at it as this constant silver thread below the soundscape, it's quite beautiful. But also maybe tinnitus is different. I'm not sure. So yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Lori?
It's Corey.
Corey. Okay.
I sort of agree with Donna in some ways. I remember walking with Bodhipala at Birkin, and she was talking about the sound of silence from Sumedho's perspective, and it sort of disarmed me a little bit, and I feel like my mother had ringing in her ears quite profoundly, and I sort of compared that underlying sort of sound to that, and in lots of ways I sometimes feel like it's a bit of a hindrance for me, that it's not silence, it's a sound that it can be disturbing, but I think what I'm hearing you say is just sort of maybe use it as a meditation object versus trying to sort of eliminate it from, because it exists. It's a vibration, and it exists in the body, and if we let it, I guess, disturb us, it will keep disturbing us.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only options are to see exactly if you can change your perception of it to a positive one. And if you can't, then it's probably not your object, but that might be the paths. Yeah, it's a good point. Wendy?
Okay. Yes, I've experienced this sound, inner sound, for forever, as far as I'm aware, and it was never annoying. And I before I came to Buddhism, I was involved with another meditation called Kriya Yoga meditation. And our teacher, anyway, he talked to us a lot about that. And as a matter of fact, we had stands that we could, while we were sitting, we could rest our elbows on and plug our ears. So this was a part of our meditation, and I just thought of it as a part, but it didn't really strike me until I heard Ajahn Sumedho's story. I don't know, a couple of months ago or so, I guess I heard him talk about that in a talk, and so I've started to use it, and it's maybe just the fact that it's new in a sense. It has certainly helped me to be more interested in my meditation practice. Let's put it that way. And I actually, I don't know how usual this is or unusual. I sometimes can have up to 3 different sounds. And and normally not, but sometimes I do, and normally it'll just be 1 or 2, and sometimes it's different in different ears, and one will be higher and one will be lower, and one will be more of that I call it sparkly type, whereas the other one will be more solid. So anyway.
I think my mom's changed his frequency depending on her caffeine intake, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
And I'll let her speak for herself in a second after Debbie, but just to say that, this does also go into the usefulness of, there's a lot to be said for sticking with a meditation object to an extent. And I know everyone has that famous analogy of you want to dig in one space until you hit water, but it really can be helpful to move around a little bit and try out different things. If meditation's getting dry, like do bring in something new. So that's great that it's catching your interest.
Yeah.
Debbie?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. This has been very enlightening to retreat. What I find is you're giving lots of takeaways and tips for us to really apply in our daily practices. So I thank you for that. And the question I have is, as we are taking this meditation journey, and there's as you see the results or the fruitfulness of this practice, and there's this urge comes within you to do this more. And we have our livelihoods and responsibilities and roles we play, a job and things like that. And there is this struggle comes in, I believe that there is a natural urge arises within us. I hate to put my mind to it, and my mind wants to quit your job, do this more. So there is kind of a struggle that goes on right now. I'm telling myself, okay, even work could be a practice, right? Whatever we do the daily, am I taking that U-turn constantly? What's happening in my body? What's happening in my thoughts? What's happening in my body? I call it U-turn. I always remember, okay, take a U-turn. And then after taking an Alaya's course, I started now asking, am I having joy? Am I, in addition to what I'm noticing, am I really having the joy? What's hindering that joy? But I'm trying to calm myself. Okay, do the job, and whatever it's taking me away from the practice, but still make that as a practice. When will that urge arise that, finally, okay, done, enough is enough. So I'm just, give me some, tips to follow. Thank you.
Is it Devi or Devi?
You can call me either way. It's fine, Devi. Yeah.
Devi.
It's really the in Indian way of saying is Devi.
Devi. Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's.
How many people here feel, in the words of Ajahn Sona, like you have one foot in a monastery and one foot on a banana peel? Hands? Let's get some hands. How many find this to be deeply uncomfortable and you don't quite know what to do with it? All right. There, yeah. Yeah. Welcome to the club, Debbie. I think my sympathies. I think a lot of us are in this situation. Less so the monastics. We're lucky. But yeah, I can't tell you how many people, I mean, you taste the Dhamma and it's the brightest thing you've ever touched. And then you have to go back to work, and what do you do with that? And I think acknowledging that it's just a difficult situation is useful. That it takes a while till the external world begins to fit more harmoniously our internal trajectory, that we have a lot of karma coming in with us. And, it's very much why I really, I'm hopeful about things like, what Sangamita is making up there, and also Clear Mountain it would be, I think, sort of monasteries and places where people, there's only so much you can do in daily life, but to have the option to go on retreat and for weeks at a time into a monastery setting, that's, I think, a huge missing piece for a lot of people. So if you can step outside of your usual routine for a week or a few days even, and go visit Sravasti Abbey, near Newport, or Ajahn Sona's or Abhayagiri or Temple, they'll take you in for free. And I really think that can help. And it's not probably going to do it all. But I think that you're right at the same time that if you really, this is your karma and dharma is duty, and we alter our external conditions as we can, but also acknowledging that, like, you're in a very real sense, you're exactly where you need to be. And if you can reach through your current duties and job, like you said, and make it practice, that there is peace there. And it would be flippant to say that it's an easy piece to come by, or that it's not. I think a lot of us, or a lot of people I know, have been straddling this line for a while, and it is difficult. But it's also really, it's a powerful movement in the heart. I mean, it's a complete reorientation of your life. Of course, it's not going to be completely easy, but you'll bring a lot of people along with you if you do it carefully with care. So good luck. Yes.
Thank you.
One foot in the monastery, one foot on the banana peel. I think that's the best phrase.
Thank you.
I think we have to wrap things up. Mom, you had your hand up. Did you have something you would like to say as well?
There I am. I don't need to take the time. I just more on that the sound, and some of us don't want to concentrate on the neck up. And I push back against Tamisabo sometimes when I have to bring things down to my belly and down because I'm up here too much, and the sound of silence is up here, and I find it annoying. And
Yeah.
Caffeine raise it an octave.
That's a really good point. I used it as my exclusive object for a year, and I was in my head and miserable. The only way I was able to use it effectively was by mixing it with the breath, because the breath can be very calming, but the sound is very enlivening. So they pair very well together. So it's a good point. All right. So I'll let Sangamita lead us out, but I just wanted to say how grateful I am to have met all of you and have been welcomed into the new community. I am hoping we're going to be here for a long time. So hopefully we get to see more of one another. We have some offerings on Wednesday evenings you can find on Clear Mountain's website. If you'd like to, sort of tap in there, or on Saturdays. If you're ever in Seattle on a Saturday, please come see us at St. Mark's. The details are on the website. If you're here on a weekday, I go for alms at Pike Place every morning near the first Starbucks. When I told Ajahn Pasano that, he said, it's like a pilgrimage. So you can always find me there and just talk if you want. And if you want to support this project, please just practice sincerely and keep on tapping in, help Sangamita as well. And it's a real pleasure. So thank you so much. And thank you, Sangamita, for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your Dhamma talks. They've been just wonderful. So I'd like to invite you to lead us out. I don't know how you like to do that, sharing merits or a chant for that or whatever you like.
Yeah, actually, let's just a second. Ravati, chanting, book, sharing merit. Sangamita, am I still co-host?
I haven't taken that privilege away from you.
Sweet. All right. I didn't know if we started a new meeting and it got out of that. Okay. In that case, let me bring up the right chanting. Okay, 32, 33. I'll screen share this. Okay, share screen. I think I'm just a participant, Sangamita, because we started a second meeting.
Did we?
Yeah, in the afternoon, I think.
I never stopped. Anyway, I just made you co-host again.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that.
I never turned my computer off, so.
Okay. Well, never mind then. But either way, I'm now co-host, so all is well. Okay, so if people want to chant the verses of sharing an aspiration with me, you can. And this is just a way of dedicating the goodness of our practice to all beings. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice. And through this active sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, May darkness and illusion be dispelled.